Joanne had spent the past 3 days trying to make sense of her fractured mind in a place that smelled like bleach and loneliness. The nurses had been tight-lipped. The doctors polite but evasive. She was starting to believe no one had answers. So when the door creaked open, she expected more of the same. Instead, a man stood there, not with a clipboard or a stethoscope, but with the kind of stillness that makes you forget how to breathe. He looked at her like he already knew her story. Not the one in her file. The real one, the one she wasn't even sure existed. His eyes were dark, not in color, but in depth. As if they'd seen too much and still chose to stay kind. She didn't know his name, but her body recognized him. Her soul flinched not from fear, but from something dangerously close to familiarity. A quick question before we continue the story. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt a strange pull toward someone, a kind of feeling that creates a cloud over all your reasoning? Even when every rational thought screams danger. Or perhaps you found yourself drawn into a world you never knew existed, one that exists parallel to our own. Tell me about your experience in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, remember to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't, because your engagement encourages us in bringing more interesting stories to your screen. He was dressed in a dark, perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Joanne's monthly rent, yet it did little to conceal the impressive breadth of his shoulders. The suit was clearly expensive, a thin layer of civilization over something wild and dangerous. He moved with the quiet, deliberate grace of a predator, completely out of place in this sterile hospital environment, yet commanding every inch of the space he occupied as if he owned not just the room, but the entire building. Joanne's heart hammered against her ribs like she'd just run a marathon, its rhythm frantic and unsteady. But it wasn't entirely from fear. No, that would have been too simple, too easy to understand. It was recognition, a terrifying, undeniable pull that went against every logical thought she'd ever had, every carefully constructed barrier she had built around her heart during 30 years of fiercely protected independence. "You're awake," his voice rumbled. The words weren't a question, but a statement of absolute, unwavering fact, carrying an authority she had never encountered in her 30 years of life. He wasn't seeking confirmation or permission. He was simply stating what was, with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong, never been denied. Joanne's mind raced like a car with no brakes, a whirlwind of fragmented memories and disorienting sensations that refused to form anything resembling coherent thought. Just 4 days ago, she had been a normal woman, an independent artist living her quiet, carefully structured life in a small city apartment filled with her paintings and sculptures. Her biggest worry had been whether her latest gallery submission would be accepted, whether she could afford groceries after paying rent. Then came the sudden, unexpected fever that had struck her, burning through her veins with an intensity that no amount of medication could touch. And finally, the shocking, whispered discovery from a panicked doctor that her adoptive parents, the only parents she had ever known, weren't her birth parents, that her entire life had been built on a foundation of well-meaning lies. Now here she was in a sterile room she didn't recognize, confronted by a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a primal, ancient dream, all dangerous edges and barely contained power. She had questions, so many questions they threatened to choke her, but the most pressing one, fueled by a surge of defiance that had carried her through 30 years of making her own way in the world, formed in her throat like a challenge. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse from days of fever and delirium, yet still carrying the same determination that had gotten her through art school, through her first gallery showing, through every challenge life had thrown at her. The man, Leo, though she didn't know his name yet, took another deliberate step into the room, his golden gaze unwavering, cutting through every defense she had ever constructed. "I am Leo," he stated, his voice now deeper, rougher, edged with something possessive, something utterly untamed that made her skin flush with heat. "And you, little mate, are coming home." The word mate hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her heart stutter in her chest. Joanne's breath caught, trapped somewhere between a gasp and a sob, between fear and something that felt dangerously like longing. "Mate!" The word felt like a brand, searing itself onto her very essence, marking her in ways she couldn't understand but felt with devastating clarity. She felt an immediate, powerful rejection of the claim, a furious surge of independence that rose like a tide within her. She was no one's anything. She belonged to herself and herself alone, especially not to this imposing stranger, this man who spoke of ancient bonds as if they were everyday occurrences, as natural as breathing. Her entire life had been about self-sufficiency, about carving her own path through the world, about not needing anyone's permission or protection. She pushed herself up from the stark white hospital bed, ignoring the dizzying protest of her body, the lingering weakness from whatever strange illness had consumed her for days. Her legs felt like rubber, trembling with the effort, but her resolve was steel forged in the fires of a lifetime of independence. She had put herself through art school, had fought for every gallery showing, had built a life from nothing but determination and talent. "I don't know who you think I am," she declared, her voice finding its strength with each word, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of confusion and fear. "But I'm not going anywhere with you. I have my own life, my own dreams, my own future planned out. I am not your mate." The last word was spat out like poison, laced with a mixture of disbelief and contempt that she hoped would cut through his insufferable confidence. She saw the flicker of something like amusement in Leo's golden eyes, quickly replaced by a predatory gleam that made her pulse race for entirely different reasons. It was the look of a hunter who had found prey that might actually provide a challenge, a worthy opponent in a game where the stakes were everything. He was clearly used to obedience, to absolute, unquestioning compliance from those around him. Her defiance, her fire, was a novel experience for him, a challenge he seemed to relish with the enthusiasm of a man who had been bored for far too long. But her rebellion would not deter him. Nothing would. He closed the remaining distance between them in two swift, fluid strides that spoke of inhuman grace, his hand reaching out, not to grasp her roughly as she expected, but to cup her jaw with a surprising, almost tender gentleness that was far more unnerving than any overt threat could have been. His touch was warm, electric, sending a jolt through her nervous system that resonated deep within her bones, awakening nerve endings she didn't know existed. "Oh, you are," he murmured, his thumb stroking her skin with a reverence that made her shiver, a response she hated but couldn't suppress no matter how hard she tried. "You just don't know it yet, little wolf. But you will. Soon enough you'll understand what you are, what we are together." His tone carried absolute finality, a declaration of intent that allowed no argument, no debate, no possibility of escape. Joanne could feel the undeniable, terrifying truth in his words, even as every fiber of her being screamed to resist, to fight against the invisible chains he was already forging around her heart. Her unwilling journey into a world she never knew existed had just begun, and she was powerless to stop it. Leo's grip on her jaw was firm but not painful, utterly unyielding yet somehow gentle, like being held by a force of nature that chose to be careful with fragile things. He simply lifted her from the bed with one arm, as if she weighed nothing more than a feather, cradling her against his broad chest with a care that contradicted every assumption she had made about his character. Her protests died in her throat, strangled by the sheer shock of his strength and the bewildering rush of his scent, now overwhelming her senses and making her feel dizzy with something that definitely wasn't fear. He carried her out of the sterile hospital room, past the stunned nurses and doctors who seemed frozen in place like mannequins, unable or unwilling to challenge his authority. Some looked away entirely, as if witnessing something they weren't meant to see. Others watched with expressions of awe and terror, as if they were seeing a force of nature in action. It was a silent, terrifying abduction that felt more like a rescue, a stark demonstration of his power in a world where she had always felt safe and protected by the thin veneer of civilization. The journey to his pack lands was a blur of speed and unfamiliar landscapes that passed by the windows like scenes from a dream. Leo placed her gently, almost reverently, in the passenger seat of a sleek, dark SUV that looked like it cost more than most people's houses. The leather seats were soft as butter, the interior filled with his intoxicating scent, making her feel like she was being wrapped in his very essence. He drove with a controlled intensity that spoke of barely leashed power, his large hands steady on the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the road and surroundings with the alertness of someone who had learned never to let down his guard. Every few minutes, his gaze would flick to her, checking on her condition with a concern that felt both possessive and protective in equal measure. Joanne sat huddled against the door, her mind reeling like a broken compass, trying to process the impossible series of events that had led her here. She was a werewolf. This man, Leo, was her mate? It was a narrative ripped from the pages of a fantasy novel, yet it was her terrifying, exhilarating reality. She kept waiting to wake up, to find herself back in her apartment surrounded by her familiar paintings and the comforting chaos of her art supplies. As they left the city behind, the concrete jungle gradually gave way to sprawling forests that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches forming a canopy so thick it blocked out most of the setting sun, creating a twilight world of shadows and mystery. The air grew cleaner, sharper, filled with the scent of earth. Joanne felt a strange, inexplicable sense of belonging, a deep, resonant hum in her very core that harmonized with the wildness outside the window. It was unsettling, this feeling of recognition for a place she had never been, yet undeniably comforting in ways that defied explanation. She stole glances at Leo, his strong profile etched against the fading light, all sharp angles and determined jaw. He was a contradiction, a man of immense human power and sophistication, yet clearly something more, something ancient and untamed that called to the growing wildness within her. "Tell me about my parents," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "My real parents. What happened to them?" Leo's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice rumbled through the vehicle like distant thunder. "They were killed," he said simply, his words carrying a weight of old pain and barely contained rage. "Hunted down by those who feared what they represented. Your mother was from an ancient bloodline, one of the last of her kind. Your father died protecting her, protecting you. They hid you with humans, hoping to keep you safe from the war that was coming." The words hit her like physical blows, each one reshaping her understanding of herself and her place in the world. "War," she whispered. "A war that's been brewing for generations," Leo explained, his voice grim. "Between those who want to live in harmony with the human world and those who believe we should rule it. Your bloodline, Joanne, could tip the balance either way. That's why they want you. That's why I need to protect you." They arrived at what Leo called the Pack Lands, just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. The pack house took Joanne's breath away. A sprawling, rustic lodge built from dark wood and stone that seemed to grow organically from the forest floor. It was massive, easily the size of a small hotel, with multiple levels and wings that disappeared into the darkness between the trees. Warm light glowed from dozens of windows, creating a beacon of life and warmth in the wilderness. The sound of voices and laughter drifted on the evening air, mixed with the distant howl of wolves that made her skin prickle with recognition. It was nothing like the sterile, cold hospital, nothing like her small city apartment. It was primal, alive, dangerous, and somehow it felt like coming home to a place she had never known she was missing. As Leo led her inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The conversation stopped mid-sentence, glasses paused halfway to lips, children froze in their games. Dozens of eyes turned towards them, and Joanne felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical presence. She could sense the mixture of curiosity, respect, and subtle suspicion that rippled through the crowd like a wave. The pack members were beautiful in ways that defied normal human standards. Too perfect, too graceful, too intensely alive. Their eyes held depths that spoke of ancient wisdom and barely contained wildness. Even the children moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural, their laughter carrying an edge of something wild and free. Leo, however, was oblivious to their scrutiny, or perhaps simply indifferent to it. He walked with an innate authority that made others step aside without conscious thought, his head held high, his presence radiating absolute dominance. He was clearly the apex predator in a room full of dangerous beings, and everyone knew it. He led her directly into a large communal living area where a group of older wolves sat around a massive stone fireplace that could have roasted an entire deer. The flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, highlighting the wisdom and power etched into every line. Their eyes held the same golden flicker she had seen in Leo's, but tempered by decades of experience and the weight of leadership. "This is Joanne," Leo announced, his voice carrying easily through the room, silencing even the whispers. He spoke with casual, yet utterly possessive inflection, as if he were introducing a prize he had won in battle. "She is my mate. You're Luna." The word Luna hung in the air like a challenge, a declaration that sealed her fate in front of everyone present. Joanne felt heat creep up her neck, a mixture of humiliation and something that felt dangerously like pride. She wasn't anyone's Luna. She was Joanne, independent artist, self-made woman, master of her own destiny. Yet the deep, resonant hum she had felt in the car intensified, a silent acknowledgement from her own core being that perhaps she was more than she had ever imagined. The pack members reacted with a mixture of awe and surprise that rippled through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Some bowed their heads in immediate respect. Others exchanged meaningful glances that spoke of conversations she wasn't privy to. A few female wolves glared openly, their expressions a clear testament to jealousy and resentment that burned like acid in their beautiful eyes. Over the following days, Joanne found herself given comfortable quarters. A spacious room with a private bath, a fireplace, and windows that looked out over the endless forest. The furniture was handcrafted from local wood, beautiful and functional, making her feel like she was staying in the world's most exclusive wilderness resort. But she was still a guest under constant, unspoken surveillance, watched by guards who melted into the shadows whenever she looked directly at them. She explored the pack house and its immediate grounds with growing fascination, feeling like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole into a world where everything was familiar yet utterly alien. The pack members moved with easy camaraderie, their interactions flowing like a complex dance of hierarchy and affection. She observed their fierce loyalty to Leo, the way their eyes tracked his movements, the immediate attention they paid to his every word and gesture. She began to learn the subtle pack customs, the way they greeted each other with touches and scents, the unspoken hierarchies that governed every interaction, the way their eyes would sometimes flash with an inner light when emotions ran high. It was a world both alien and strangely familiar, as if she were remembering something she had never learned. The truth of her heritage began to unfold gradually, like a flower opening to the sun. Leo, with surprising gentleness and infinite patience, began to reveal the secrets of her past during long evening walks through the forest. He told her she was not merely a human who had stumbled into their world, but the daughter of a powerful, ancient lineage of wolves, a bloodline thought lost to time and tragedy. "Your mother's line," he explained one evening as they sat by a small stream, the water reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds, could shift without the moon's call. They were the bridge between our world and the human one, able to walk in both without losing themselves to either. This, he explained, was why she was his fated mate, why their bond transcended mere attraction or compatibility. It was written in the very fabric of their beings, a connection that tied their souls together across lifetimes and destinies. Her adoptive parents had hidden her among humans, he clarified, hoping to protect her from the ancient enemies who would kill her for what she represented, the key to powers that could reshape both worlds. Joanne struggled to reconcile her quiet, artistic human upbringing with this overwhelming revelation of primal identity. She felt deep confusion, a profound sense of betrayal warring with understanding. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, a puzzle with missing pieces that were only now being revealed. Then came the shifts, the first terrifying glimpses of her inner wolf fighting to break free from 30 years of suppression. The experience was vivid and overwhelming. It began as an uncontrollable tremor deep in her bones, a searing pain that felt like her skeleton was trying to remake itself from the inside out. A primal urge to run, to howl at the moon, to hunt and be free overwhelmed every rational thought. She would collapse without warning, gasping for air that never seemed sufficient, her body contorting as muscles and bones prepared for transformations she couldn't control or understand. Her senses exploded with overwhelming input. She could smell individual pack members 3 floors away, hear conversations happening in the forest, feel the vibration of small animals moving through the underbrush. Leo was always there during these episodes, his presence a grounding force in the chaos of her awakening. His voice became a low, soothing rumble that seemed to calm the storm within her, guiding her through the agony with words that spoke directly to the wolf she was becoming. He would explain the process, the connection to the lunar cycle, the instinctual nature of what she was experiencing. "Don't fight it," he would murmur, his hand steady on her shoulders as she shook with the effort of holding herself together. "Fighting will only make it worse. You're not losing yourself, Joanne. You're finding who you were always meant to be." She resisted his attempts to teach her, frustrated by her body's betrayal and his assumed authority over her transformation. She struggled internally. She hated the lack of control, the feeling of being forced into a destiny she hadn't chosen. She had spent 30 years building a life based on self-determination, on choosing her own path, and now everything was being decided for her by biology and ancient magic she didn't understand. Yet a part of her, a wild, nascent spark that grew stronger with each passing day, was undeniably drawn to his strength, to the raw power he exuded like heat from a flame. There was something intoxicating about the way he moved through the world, claiming space and commanding respect without effort. And there was the growing, terrifying power within herself, a strength that made her feel like she could run forever, fight anything, be more than she had ever dreamed possible. It was a battle of wills that played out in stolen glances and charged silences, a dance between defiance and destiny that neither could escape. Joanne, the unwilling bride, found herself caught in the powerful current of forces beyond her control, even as she fought against the tide that threatened to sweep away everything she thought she knew about herself. The full moon was coming, Leo warned her, and with it, her first complete transformation. She would have to choose, he said, between embracing what she was or fighting it until it destroyed her. The choice, he promised, would be hers to make. But as Joanne stood at her window, watching the silver light grow stronger each night, she wondered if the choice had ever really been hers at all. The wolf inside her was growing stronger, more insistent, and she could feel her human life slipping away like sand through her fingers. The question wasn't whether she would transform, it was whether she would survive it with her sense of self intact. The unwilling bride was about to discover that some destinies were written in starlight and blood, and no amount of human determination could change what the moon had already decided. The wolf was awakening, and with it, a fate she had no idea she was born to carry. But this was only the beginning. In Part 2, Joanne will face her first full transformation, uncover secrets buried in blood and shadow, and be forced to choose between the life she built and the destiny she was born for. Are you ready for what comes next? Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out when the Part 2 drops.